Before we get into anything complicated or technical, let's take a look at a cartoon block called Toonami in the year 2000. Toonami is an afternoon cartoon block started in 1997 and since then has primarily shown Japanese animation widely known as anime. The series of shows have been, and still are, widely popular because it originally was the only place to see anime. Since it's the year 2015, I'm sure you know what anime is and have at least heard of Toonami if you're even remotely connected to the anime scene. For some of you, Toonami was the thing you look forward to every day after school. Toonami has made a wide range of shows, specials, and movies, but today we're going to focus only on one show as evidence for the following argument. The model minority myth has evolved from favoritism of adults to obsession and cultural misunderstandings by youth. It is hands down one of the weirdest digi-evolutions of nerd fandom. So let's take a look at the 2000 American release of Tenchi Muyo.
A Shinto shrine deep in rural Japan. A boy trains diligently. Soon he will become a man.
Now is your time to grasp the future.
His name? Tenchi Masaki. In an instant, the reality Tenchi knows will be shattered.
What could that be?
He'll enter a world where alien princesses traverse the galaxy in living ships.
Let's get out of here!
Space pirates plunder at will. And galaxy police patrol the stars, protecting the innocent.
Pull over, Lightfoot! License and registration!
But the most important discovery he'll make is that 6 crazy women living under the same roof all have the hots
Tenchi! What?
for him.
Leave Tenchi alone!
Tenchi is mine!
Tenchi and I are meant to be together, don't you remember?
Just close your eyes, Tenchi.
I've got you!
This is it! The ultimate weapon!
Oh, Tenchi, you are just so sweet!
You're crazy!
Getting married to Tenchi!
Now he'll have to deal with bounty hunters,
Fire now!
ancient demons, mad scientists, and shared bathroom time.
You're a naughty boy, aren't you, Tenchi?
The universe needs a new champion. Tenchi needs some peace and quiet. Good luck.
Everyone calm down!
Tenchi Muyo, starting Monday, July 3rd.
Girls, stop it, girls!
Love stinks. Only Toonami.
So this was the first popular harem anime shown in the US on public television. A harem anime is a genre of cartoon where a bunch of people are romantically interested in one person. Usually that one person being male and the rest female. There are animes with the harem being male and the main character is female, but those aren't really shown in the US on public television. The reason why this lives as a genre is because the drama and comedy come from the love of the singular character being unwanted. In this case, Tenchi is a very conservative traditionalist who isn't really supposed to have time for relationships because he is a religious nerd. Also, all the girls who are into him are aliens who are crazy and have a lot of violent things happen around them. So with all this in mind, what does it have to do with the model minority myth? First, let's take a look at the model minority myth. The model minority myth is an interesting kind of racism, to say the least. The model minority myth is the perception that Asians are better than any other minority because they integrated into becoming an American or white culture with little change. This stemmed from a special type of favoritism compared to black people during the selling of homes in the 1960s. We can originate its mass media influence in 1966 to the New York Times Magazine, which had an article titled "Success Story, Japanese American Style." It is a complete romanticism of the previous racism and struggles that Japanese and Chinese Americans had to go through to be seen as American. Later in the same year, they also focused on Chinese Americans in a similar article. This was a reflection of the ethnic communities that had an increase in political roles and white communities. Because of the media talking about how great and independent the Asian community was, the piece was a passive-aggressive critique and argument against the black community who were fighting against the system's racism. So ultimately, this got a lot of white communities to like Japanese and Chinese communities a lot because they were being labeled more similarly than different. Ultimately, mass media made white Americans favor Japanese Americans more than black Americans or even other types of Americans. What does this have to do with Tenchi Muyo? The effect of the model minority myth on the public was completely reproduced for children in the early 2000s because of shows like Tenchi Muyo. Let's get a quick refresher on what we're talking about.
Every man needs a good woman. Tenchi has 6.
Are they all Tenchi's girlfriends?
Well, sort of, but please bear with us.
Where's Tenchi?
Tenchi Muyo, weekdays at 5:30. Love stinks.
With heteronormative and possibly sexist issues put aside, let's take a look at why and how this show was attractive to nerds back then. You are a 7 or older child on the verge of puberty who is starting to be interested in romance and other stuff, and what comes along is a show not only about comedic romance, but also has action-packed storyline. Not only that, but it's a cartoon show with more animated violence than any other American cartoon at the time, waiting for you as you get home from school. A lot of kids ended up watching this show. But it wasn't just the romance they learned about. They also learned about something about Japan. The very first thing they share about this anime is the culture. But it isn't a modern-day culture of Japan. It's a temple in the countryside of Japan. Already we're being shown a minority situation. Not all Japanese people live like this. We see Tenchi training with a wooden practice kendo sword. Again, another traditional Japanese practice. Now we start getting into the science fiction of it all, and as we dive into the science fiction, we start to see signs of Japanese culture predominantly a part of the show. Some parts of the culture is ancient and a little bit of it is modern, but remember that all of this is being shown to a child who is learning. What the American children learn simultaneously is the science fiction world and Japanese culture. The only issue is that since the kid is learning what Japanese culture is at the same time as the fictional one, some of the ideas of the fictional world seem Japanese. For example, the idea that all these girls would like one person and fight over him is part of the genre and the science fiction part. Some of them believe in an ancient alien prophecy that allows them to be together. 2 of them just fall in love with him because he was just nice to them, and 1 of them likes him because he has powers that they want to measure for science. In the mind of a child, this seemed like a part of Japanese culture, especially since it's a whole genre that you can see this happen again and again in these types of shows. It's a simple misunderstanding. But in the year 2000, you couldn't really hop online and just ask somebody on a forum if this was all true. So the kids watch the show, like the show, watch more shows, and then either start learning about Japanese culture through other means like taking a class in school, or they keep watching the shows and learn about Japanese culture through the cartoons. As they grow up, they start liking the genre even more, and for some of them, they even start to like it a little too much. Some kids end up liking the show so much that their obsession over anime become noticed and labeled. They become a weeaboo. A weeaboo is someone who is obsessed with Japan to the point where they want to be Japanese and don't accept their indigenous culture. Generally, they are the white otakus. And an otaku is somebody who is in Japan who is Japanese, and it's a term for someone who is obsessed with Japanese anime. But for now, I'm going to summarize the concept of a weeaboo. A weeaboo is someone who loves anime so much they actually think that Japan is so amazing that they wish and want to fully integrate into the culture. And who can blame them if their life sucks? If you were a kid with a cultural disconnection from your American life and you saw a ton of shows like Tenchi Muyo, where conflict of everyday life is fun, exciting, and sexual, you would rather have that version of Japan than your version of America. But the part that makes them obsessed and not understand what real Japan is, that they are seeing a fictional fantasized version of not only the people, but even the culture. But this doesn't happen with all anime. Take, for example, Dragon Ball Z. It's an anime that has a ton of action and a lot of Japanese characters based off of a Chinese legend. The thing is that Japan and China's culture aren't predominantly displayed in the show, so there can't be a misunderstanding. So a recap is that kids start watching anime and not only learn about whatever the show is about, but they also learn about the fictional culture of Japan. This leads to some of them to extremes of loving Japan so much that they wish they were Japanese, known as weeaboos. The model minority myth is about a bunch of adults learning about the not-so-correct Japanese-American changes of cultural life to easily fit within America, and so they are given favoritism. From what I understand, they are both instances of America being interested in Japanese people because of mass media not fully representing the community. The model minority myth completely romanticizes the struggle and racism that was put on the Japanese people during World War II and prior, before the initial article of 1966, and thus makes people like the Japanese. The Toonami block completely romanticizes the actual realism of Japanese culture for children and thus makes kids like the Japanese more, and in some cases helps them reject their own culture. The model minority myth didn't stay the same. It evolved. It went from adults to kids and articles to cartoons. Of course, none of this was on purpose in the year 2000, but this clearly was a point that helped weeaboos have their magical favoritism for Japan. The only way for this to be stopped in 2000 was if Japanese culture was taught or a little bit more predominant in American culture, so that way when kids watched the show, they weren't learning about a culture and a new fictional story. All in all, did this current form of the model minority myth stem any actual problems like its original form in 1966? That is debatable because we do see a large amount of anime fans with low social skills who are caught between acting like what they think is Japanese and their own culture. Misunderstanding a culture is a fairly easy thing to do. The long-lasting problems actually arise when misunderstanding a culture is perceived as learning about a culture unguided. The model minority myth is a unique form of misunderstanding which can happen at any time so long as you have a culture being represented in mass media. The best way to make sure this doesn't happen again is actually rather simple. You can have a diverse enough representation of culture in media, you can encourage people to learn more about the culture, or you can teach people how to critically think about what they are learning. That way, we can evolve from myth to fact.